The Society of Petroleum Engineers presents SPE Tech Talk. Today's Tech Talk is sponsored by Qube Technologies.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today for this SPE Tech Talk with Qube Technologies. I'm your host for this broadcast, Victoria Jones. In this episode, we'll explore how methane sensors from Qube Technologies maintain reliable accuracy over long-term deployments, even in challenging conditions. We'll also discuss the innovative design features, continuous monitoring capabilities, and advanced data analytics that ensure precise methane detection, helping industries meet regulatory requirements and enhance environmental safety. Finally, we'll take a deep dive with Qube into the practical applications and real-world successes of these cutting-edge sensors. So one great way to interact with today's broadcast is to let us know where you're watching from. If you have a question for today's expert, type it in the comment section on LinkedIn or on SPE Energy stream for a chance our guests will answer it during our Q&A segment. But before we begin today's discussion, let's take a quick look at today's poll question. So today we're asking you which aspect of methane detection technology is most important to your organization? A, long-term accuracy and reliability, B, real-time data monitoring and analytics, C, ease of deployment and maintenance, D, compliance with environmental regulations, or E, cost effectiveness and ROI. So let us know your answers in the comment section on LinkedIn or Energy Stream, and we'll take a look at those results later on in the show. So let's get started and introduce today's guest. Joining us today from Calgary, Alberta, Canada is Eric Wen, COO of Qube Technologies. Eric oversees Qube's operations and supports product development and sales. In his previous role with Bain & Company, he served as a manager in their London and Seattle offices. Prior to Bain, Eric was a professional engineer at Talisman Energy in Austerna, where he worked in oil and gas projects in North America and Australia. He holds an MBA from London Business School and a mechanical engineering degree from the University of British Columbia. So hello, Eric, and welcome to this SPE Tech Talk.
Thanks, Victoria. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So let's set the scene here. Can you give our audience an overview of methane detection challenges?
Yeah, where to begin? There's lots of challenges facing methane detection. I think when we started Qube, one of the things that we thought was an opportunity is the intermittency of emissions. So, emissions are highly temporal. They can happen for a variety of reasons, operationally, weather related, whether there's maintenance events. And at the time, there was a lot of intermittent monitoring. So you're only measuring emissions when you're on site, whether it's a manual camera or a flyover. We thought there was an opportunity to monitor things continuously. The challenge with that was getting a sensor that was robust enough for harsh environments, but was reliable as well as low cost. And we spent about 3 years developing the sensor itself in order to kind of meet our requirements, but it allowed us to deploy low cost, reliable, continuous monitoring to measure emissions on a site continuously.
Great. Thanks so much for setting the scene here. So what are some of the innovative design features of the Qube Technologies sensors?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sensor is part of like a broader solution. So there's the hardware itself, the analytics, which converts the hardware raw signals into leak locations and quantities, and then there's the web app where you visualize all of it. And it's all fairly integrated together. But when we started, the first part was getting the sensor working and the IoT platform ready, which does the data transmission on the sensor itself. We did a broad market scan and literature review of what is currently available, what have people tested in terms of low cost sensors that you can use for this application. We ended up selecting a metal oxide sensor. Primary reason being it's extremely sensitive to methane, it's extremely low cost. The challenge with that metal oxide sensor is that it's also very sensitive to environmental changes like temperature and humidity. So, um, a key part of our design on the sensor itself is we spend a lot of time figuring out how do we compensate for changes um, in 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 temperature and humidity that is not real in terms of changing the actual concentrations that it's measuring. So it's compensating for those for a broad range of temperature ranges. So that was kind of the key unlock. Once we figured that out, and we we have IP around the sensor design itself as well as the calibration process. Each one of our sensors are individually calibrated because um, with metal oxide sensor, uh, the tin oxide substrate that's actually on it varies sensor by sensor, but even by micron level, it changes the coefficients that you have to use. So figuring that out was like a key unlock on the sensor side. A lot of our R&D side today, focuses on how do we ensure that we get the best signal out of that sensor over long periods of time, and how do we convert that into leak locations and quantities that are accurate and reliable over time.
Got it. Yeah, we're hearing about this technology. I'm sure our audience is curious of what this looks like in real life. So, can you share some real world performance, maybe some case studies on how these sensors have been successfully deployed in various industries?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples, and not just, I know this is SB and is very much focused on oil and gas, but the first example is, I guess the most common thing that we find is, large fugitive emissions. Something broke, a thief hatch got stuck open, and the wind carries those plumes to our sensors. You have a typical with continuous monitoring, you can see real time baseline data. So here's what the average emissions are over the site. If something happens, usually you can see a pretty significant uptick in your emission rates. So the most common one is that you find something that's broken. Either it's a stuck thief hatch, broken valve, unlit flare. One of the interesting case studies we found with the customer was um, they had our sensors out as well as other sensors because they were doing a pilot. They kept on getting alarms from both of our sensors. But when they went out to the field, they really couldn't find it. And we were localizing these sensors to um, a the burners effectively. Um, our platform, you can actually post multiple sensors on it. So in addition to a methane sensor, we put a carbon monoxide sensor on it. And so what we did was we tried to correlate the methane data with any carbon monoxide hits. What we found was that whenever we got methane alarms, there was a strong correlation with CO signals from the separators. Um, One of the operators had a hypothesis that maybe the burners were running a bit too rich. They had one of their guys come out and tune it. As soon as they did the tuning, you can see a steep drop off of the emission. They weren't able to find this with optical gas imaging camera because they work on a temperature difference. And when they were pointing it at the burners, it just wasn't showing up. So it was a really unique case of, we're finding kind of long or operating optimization opportunities, not just broken flanges or stuck thief hatches. How do you operate your equipment more effectively, and being able to see the impact of that over time? Because as soon as they tuned that, we saw a steep drop off in both ours and the other sensors in terms of the methane, but we also saw a steep drop off in carbon monoxide. So that's you know something that most people probably haven't used it before, but for that customer now, every deployment that we do now comes with the carbon monoxide sensor.
Very interesting. And I understand that you have some slides too. So maybe if we can pull this up, if you want to walk us through what we're looking at here, and give our audience an overview.
Yeah, so I mentioned our metal oxide sensors. Each one of them goes through a calibration process. So the first part of that is a lab calibration. So what you're seeing here on the left-hand side is a concentration over time plot. So the orange line is different concentration hits in our lab chamber. So we put in known quantities of methane. The black line is just showing the temperature variance. So I mentioned these metal oxide sensors are sensitive to temperature and humidity. I'm not showing the humidity plot, but you can get the idea. We put in known amounts of methane with the sensor, vary the temperature and the humidity. What comes out of that is a calibration curve. So think of it as like a y equals mx plus b. Obviously, it's more complicated than that, but like the curve itself is very is similar for um, each device, but the coefficients, the B, if you will, are different and unique for each sensor. So what you're seeing on the right-hand side is a blue dotted line of the outputted concentration from the sensor across a bunch of different temperature variants and how that matches up with the input concentration. What you want is strong overlap between the two. So each sensor that we deploy is individually calibrated and goes through this process for a wide variety of temperature and humidities. And the reason why we do that is, our sensors are deployed. We have around 6,000 deployments across 10 countries, everything from northern Canada in the winter, where you can get down to minus 40 Celsius, which I think is close to minus 40 Fahrenheit, down to Bahrain or Texas and the Permian in the heat of summer, where you can get up over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Um, so that's kind of the first part of our sensor calibration process. If you want to go to the next slide, the other thing that we do is we do a lot of reference testing. So this is just purely on the raw sensor data. So we built our own control release testing facility. We also do control release testing at places like METEC. But effectively, a control release testing facility allows you to release gas in known quantities. We put a bunch of sensors around a site, and then we're measuring it. What we're doing here is we are comparing the Qube output, the lab calibrated Qube sensor output, versus a reference monitor. In this case, it's a Los Gatos gas analyzer, which uses spectroscopy to measure gas concentration. Orders of magnitude more expensive, but it's highly, highly accurate. And so it's hard to distinguish here, and that's kind of the point. Is the green line is the Qube output, the blue line is the Los Gatos, and you can see a super strong correlation between the two when there's no gas emitted, as well as when there's gas emitted, and you get that spikiness on it. So the lab calibration, we do sample size testing in our control release testing to make sure these devices are performing in ambient condition relative to a field monitor or relative to a reference monitor.
Very interesting to see that data and testing. So thanks so much for walking us through those slides. But before we move into our next talking point, and if we want to go back to those slides as well, I want to just thank our audience for participating in today's discussion. And I also want to encourage them to get involved in today's discussion. So it is live. So we would like to ask you, if you have any questions or comments, just make sure that you're typing those into the comment section on LinkedIn or Energy Stream, because we do have our audience Q&A section coming up here soon. So Eric, moving into our next question here, can you explain how Qube sensors leverage continuous monitoring and advanced data analytics? Kind of giving just an overview of that.
Yeah, there's a couple ways we do that. I mean, I think I mentioned there's the hardware, the analytics, and then the web app. The one part of the analytics is how do we convert raw signals into concentration signals into leak locations and flow rates. So what you need to be able to do that is effectively wind speed. So if you have, example why wind speed is important is if you have a really small leak but no wind, you can get concentration pooling, and then you can get high concentration readings, but for a relatively low leak. The opposite is also true. You get a massive leak, but the wind is blowing. It disperses that concentration. You get low concentration, but it's actually a really, really big leak. So one thing that we use in that advanced analytics is plume modeling. So how do we actually convert that into leak quantities? Another example of advanced analytics is how do we maintain the long-term reliability of these sensors. So if you want to pull up the last slide there, one thing that we've developed is, so, I'll recap. We do lab calibration for each sensor. We'll sample size of a few of them. The other thing each sensor has is a auto calibration algorithm built into the device itself. So what out of calibration, the one thing about these metal oxide sensors, because there's a tin oxide layer on it, over time that'll degrade. And they can degrade as a function of the place they're deployed at, the manufacturing of that specific sensor itself. Um, so baseline drift is a problem with all sensors. You can see in the bottom chart there, this is concentration versus time between a Los Gatos and a Qube sensor. The bottom sensor here has exhibited drift. So you're seeing that baseline slightly elevated. The baseline, the green sensor, is slightly elevated across over the blue LGA. You get increased concentrations as a result. That factors into your leak locations or leak quantification model, and you get error into it. So what we've developed is um, um, a auto calibration. You don't need to take these sensors back into the lab to recalibrate them. The sensors know when they're in clean air. You get a really low, kind of stable baseline emission, and then we actually if we detect a baseline drift, we recalculate the coefficient so that the baseline is roughly a 2 ppm average. I don't have a fourth slide on this, but if I did, I did have it, but um, it's showing what we did when we take devices or sensors that were deployed in the field for several years that have gone through couple cycles of the auto calibration run. What happens if we take them back to the lab? So imagine full circle, and then we redo the calibration test. We do 5, 10, 25 ppm, and we're getting really strong correlation, almost as good as when they were left the lab on the day one. So gives us confidence that even after several years of deployment and several cycles of the auto calibration, these sensors are still maintaining their reliability in terms of data readings.
Yeah, this is all super interesting. So thank you so much for diving into this. I did have one more question for you before we move into the results of our poll question. So could you discuss the broader impacts of this technology on industry and environmental safety?
Yeah, there's a couple. I think if you think about what I mentioned, the problem of intermittency of emissions, if you're able to have something that tells you when an emission actually happens and you're sending um, repair teams when they happen, there's a couple good things that can result. Number one is obviously you fix things a lot earlier. So the if you have a set leak and you shorten the amount of time that leak can go on, the volume of emissions actually goes down. So that's a good thing. That's a product you can sell. That's product that's not emitted to the atmosphere. The other thing that what we found with operators who've scaled up deployments of Qube sensors is that you know unfortunately, or just as a product of just this industry going through its evolution, there's a lot of things that could leak out there. There's a lot of vintages of equipment out there and a lot of different operating practices. And what we found is, most sites will have some sort of emissions. Missions tend to follow a power law where you can have 90% of your mission volumes come from 10% of your sites. If you're only intermittently spotting for these sites using intermittent scanning technologies, it's really hard to know which of your top 10 sites are your biggest contributors. And with continuous monitoring, you have that live list, and that list changes depending on day of the week, time of the day, even. And so, what that allows you to do as an operator is you know send your people your repair capital more efficiently, so your dollar spend per volume of emissions abated is maximized. And that's really important. You want to send people out there to fix the biggest emissions. You want to get the biggest reductions possible. So that's one implication. I think in the future, what we're really moving towards is as the world moves from estimated emission reporting to measurement informed inventories to measured inventories, what people report are specific to their specific equipment. We think continuous monitoring has a role to play in that. It's still early stage technology, but we think there's really good science that's being done here. I think we're contributing to that, and we hope to see that technology evolve so that it's a key pillar in a site's reported emission values.
Very good. So before we continue, let's take a quick look at our poll question that we asked earlier today. So we asked which aspect of methane detection technology is most important to your organization? A, long-term accuracy and reliability, B, real-time data monitoring and analytics, C, ease of deployment and maintenance, D, compliance with environmental regulations, or E, cost effectiveness and ROI. But I'm actually going to turn this to you, Eric. So I'm curious, what do you think is the most important to an organization?
Oh, I think, would you mind flashing those up again?
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're all important at different stages of deployments. I think long-term accuracy, reliability is obviously important, very important, both in the pilot stage. Does this stuff work? Am I finding things um, when I get an alarm? But as you scale and you have thousands of these, are they reliable? Like you're paying for continuous monitoring. Um, you want continuous data, right? And it's really important to have that reliability component. Like none of the other stuff matters in terms of real time if the devices aren't working in the field. So I'll pick one. I'll pick number one.
Maybe some all of the above. Maybe we should add that in, or just that one
Yeah.
at the top. Awesome. Well, moving into our audience questions here. So, can you maybe explain how Cube's methane sensors maintain their accuracy over long-term deployments, even in harsh environmental conditions?
Yeah, I think I kind of touched on that already earlier with just like the auto calibration and the retesting of devices. But maybe the other part I'll touch on is, um, you know, a bit on the reliability part, more on like the overall hardware component of it. So, one thing with low cost, the reason why we're focused on lower cost continuous monitoring is that there's a lot of things you can monitor in this industry. And what we found is that the more devices you can place, the more coverage you have over it. So our sensors are relying on wind transport of a plume from the leak to the sensor. If you have one sensor kind of downwind of the prevailing wind, that's pretty good. But if the wind changes, you're going to have missed spots. So the more sensors you can deploy out there, the better. We like to think we're fairly low cost, where the value of the gas is often a lot more than putting 4 or 5, 6 sensors around a site. Um, when you have hundreds of sites or thousands of sites and thousands or hundreds of sites and thousands of devices, it's really important to make sure that those devices are operating as reliable as possible. And you know that comes down to the sensors, which I talked about, the auto calibration, retesting sensors that have been out in the field. But really, like, how do you monitor for overall device reliability, making sure that you have site coverage? So one thing we've done is, we have I'd like to think a pretty awesome dashboard that customers interface with. Internally, we have a very robust health dashboard that our internal teams interface with. So similar to how a customer would get an alarm when an emission exceeds a certain threshold over a period, we would get an alarm when, let's say, we don't get a signal over X period of time, or the deviation of that signal versus other sensors on the site is significant, especially on wind, or the solar recharge rate hasn't happened. Very common thing in the winter in Canada when you get snow. um, and Being really responsive about mitigating that, working with the operators, our field teams, third parties to make sure that those devices are always up and running. Um, with certain customers at a certain scale, we have a preventative maintenance program, where periodically when people are going out on site and doing ABO inspection, we ask them to do a filter inspection. Is there dust buildup on our filters? If so, take an air hose and blow it off. Over time, if you don't do it, you can get a pressure buildup, which can change your sensor response. But you know, as much as we want to be, completely hands off, most equipment on an oil and gas side, especially in the IoT side, there's some form of maintenance, and there's some form of analytics that tell you about the reliability. And I think that's often missed in this world. And I think we've really tried to do a good job of that, because you know as we scaled up from, in our first year of commercial, we had a couple hundred deployments. By the second year, we had a couple thousand. That really changed the dynamic on how we support those devices.
All right, thank you so much. And you touched on this earlier just about this technology being applied in different industries, but I'm curious what specific industries or applications have benefited the most from Cube's methane detection technology.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we started a business for an oil and gas use case, but at the end of the day, it's devices, it's measuring concentration of methane in ambient conditions. So anything that emits methane theoretically could be monitored by our devices. And what we've found kind of in the recent year or two is we're pushing into other industries. If you look at a stack chart of methane emissions globally, oil and gas is actually not even the biggest one. Agriculture is a massive one, landfills, mining. One really interesting use case that we found is the world of renewable natural gas. So, an example of this is biogas, for example, over manure lagoons. So, think about an agriculture farm with pigs. Um, there's different piles of manure. You can put a cover over that and then siphon off the gas that comes off the methane. That gas is actually traded at a much higher multiple than fossil fuel energy. So there's a lot of value in that. And what we found is, you know, finding a leak is a lot of lost value for the operator of that RNG facility. It's a different sell than oftentimes oil and gas. I mean, we're still, I think the sell is still there, but because of the delta between the RNG price and the fossil fuel price, um, oftentimes on oil and gas is about regulatory compliance and cost avoidance and liability avoidance, whereas in RNG, it's about revenue maximization. So different cell, obviously the same principle. We're finding emissions in real time. You see a baseline, you see a massive hit. Oftentimes, it's easier to sell things when you're telling people that you're going to help them make more money than avoiding liabilities. But we're pushing in that landscape and in that space. I think landfill is getting a lot of attention now. We're actually taking our product and seeing how we can modify it for landfill. A very clear
Mm,
example is like in oil and gas, you have very discrete point sources. It's a tank, it's a flare, it's a separator. In a landfill, it's diffuse
mhm.
sources, so massive areas, right? How does our model adapt to that?
And what you were saying actually ties in really nicely to my last question for you because we are against the clock here with our time today. But looking ahead, what innovations or improvements do you foresee in the field of methane detection technology?
Yeah, I think a big focus for us is on totalized emissions. So, can you use point sources to get a good view or fairly accurate view of what your total emissions are on a site, and then attributing it to different components? I mentioned, we have point sensors around a site, and if the wind is not blowing in the right direction or the wind is blowing between two sensors, we're not going to get signals. There's really interesting things you can do from a advanced analytics and machine learning perspective where you can use machine learning to predict whether there's a continuous leak and you're just getting sniffs of it because the wind is variable versus you're just quantifying what you're detecting. So if you're able to do that and you're kind of able to fill in some of that time gap with a certain level of confidence, your cumulative volumes over months or quarters is going to be more accurate. So that's a really big focus for us. It's a lot why we do a lot of control release testing facility at our own facility and others. Um, the other thing that we're really excited about is we built this really awesome dashboard. There's a lot of things you can build on top of that. One thing we just released is a LDAR workflow. So we get an alarm. You can now use our system to track when you went to the site, what you found. You can eventually upload your OGI camera inspection. You can kind of have a paper trail of like emissions. You can also put in third-party data. So you can kind of look on a timeline basis, like here's what my emissions was on the continuous monitoring. Here's what snapshots of aerials or flyovers or satellite technology. How does that compare it all on a single platform? So I'm pretty excited about that. Some of that's already released out in our 2.4 version that just got announced.
Yeah, lots of great things ahead. That's very exciting. So, we really appreciate you joining us today for this SP Tech Talk on how Cube's methane sensors ensure long term accuracy. So, Eric, how should people get in contact with you if they want to learn more? And also, if they want to learn more about these sensors and using them in their operations?
Yeah, please visit us at www.qubeIoT.com. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. Reach out, love to chat. I'm based in Calgary, but travel frequently to our offices in Houston and other parts of the US. So please get in touch.
Excellent. So thank you so much again, and special thanks to Qube Technologies. You can watch a replay of this episode on the SPE Energy stream, the industry's digital pulse, by visiting streaming.spe.org. I'm your host, Victoria Jones. Join us again next time right here on SPE Tech Talk.
Thanks, everybody.
Don't miss a moment of any of the great SPE LinkedIn Live events. From the event page, click Attend and add to calendar for notification reminders when an SPE LinkedIn Live event is ready to begin. SPE Lives, Tech Talks, Get to Know series, and more. Remember, click Attend on LinkedIn.
In a rapidly evolving energy industry, you need to stay ahead of the curve with relevant content available when and where it's convenient for you. You need the upgraded SPE Energy Stream, the global platform for high-quality content with the energy industry. Fuel your energy career with Energy Stream's sleek new look and easy access to top-quality technical solutions, insights and innovations, trending topics, thought leadership, market outlooks, and education. From original programs to exclusive SPE event highlights, this exciting, easy-to-navigate platform features insightful content delivered live and on demand. Explore insights from industry thought leaders. Then save the videos that interest you and watch them at your convenience. Be at the forefront of energy knowledge and explore the newly updated SPE Energy Stream now.
The Society of Petroleum Engineers presents SPE Tech Talk. Today's Tech Talk is sponsored by Qube Technologies.